Thank you. I'm going to be brief, and I would like to start by thanking Christina and Palma for inviting me to this very interesting conference in Rome, which is the city where I come from. Today we're going to be talking about governance and social sustainable urban development in the Mediterranean. I'm going to be unpacking two of the main issues that the previous speakers have been talking about, which is one is sustainable development and the other one is governance. I'm going to unpack them and also reflect on both of them and applying them in the context of one project I worked on in Barcelona. And I'm pleased the colleagues from Barcelona are here, so it'd be interesting to hear their thoughts on what my conclusions are. So if we step back and we look at sustainable development, we can notice that the social dimension is always the one which has been least studied and often overlooked in the debate. In the mid-1990s, the environment dominated the debate, and with economic and social issues a little bit on the fringes. In the mid-1990s, with Agenda 21 and so on, governance became an important part of the whole sustainable development debate. Economic issues also gained a little bit more prominence, but the social elements were still on one side. I think it was just by the mid-2000s that we reached a sort of balanced and integrated approach to sustainable development in which all the three dimensions, the four dimensions were taken into account: the governance, the environmental, the social, and the economics. And then in the late 2000s, 2008, the crisis struck, and then economic just became the main priority of governments because people are losing jobs and training and so on. So I hope we're not going back to this skewed approach to sustainable development. I also did a study on the social dimension, once again, of social development, and also how do you translate this notion into practice. In my study, which involved a few European cities, I identified all these themes as key themes to the implementation of the social dimension of sustainable development, and I divided them into traditional and emerging. Traditional, the one that we're all familiar with: basic needs, equity, employment, human rights. The new one, the emerging one, deal with more soft issues like empowerment, identity, social mixing, social capital. And I think all these issues need to be taken into account together when we want to do a policy which addresses the issue of sustainable development. I've highlighted in my presentation the red themes and domains which I think are really relevant for governance. I want to go back to what William was saying at the beginning, that there are different approaches to governance, and these are not mutually exclusive. And a few speakers before me mentioned this consensus building, the importance of consensus building, but sometimes you can approach the governance from other perspective, just managing conflict, which is much quicker. The Swedish colleagues here know very well that in Sweden, they're very participatory and they're involved. There is a lot of consensus building, but decisions are taken, it's a slow process. It's very thought process, but it can take years to reach decisions. If you want to involve, if you want to bring a lot of coalitions. So sometimes, because in terms of crisis as well, conflict, and managing conflict, it's probably quicker and can offer quicker answers. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but what I'm simply trying to say here that there are different approaches to governance, and I think this should be taken into account when we want to develop policies for governance, which could be top-down, bottom-up, prescriptive, participatory, and all, the whole here. We talked about informal versus the institutionalized governance. They're not exclusive. I mean, the cities as a whole, there's not an informal governance and an institutionalized governance. It's just the governance of the city. So now I would like to go to address the main theme of this conference, which is, or this session of this conference, which is decentralization, governance, and localisms. I think we can all agree in this room that there's been a reemergence of community as a main policy arena for the development of, for the delivery of sustainable development. So we don't look at sustainable development anymore national level, but well, both the national level, but also at the local level, where what matters to the people, to the local communities. In the EU, there's been a shift in terms of decision making from the centralized approach to governance to the more regional and the local autonomy. We're all familiar with the subsidiarity principle of the EU, which states that decisions have to be taken at the lowest spatial level as possible, so at closer to the people as possible. And there's been a bit of controversy on this subsidiarity principle, because sometimes local authorities have the power to block the implementation of national plans because they need to be on board when it comes to implementing policies. So all this governance, this local governance, to me has good and bad aspects. I'm going to briefly review the main advantages, which I've summarized in a few points. It's clearly a democratic advantage of local governance, because if you devolve decision making, this is a good characteristic of society. This is how democracies work. There's also a moral argument for local governance, because you allow communities to express their needs and aspirations more directly. Moving on to the policy aspects of things, I think local governance can increase the effectiveness of policies because you deliver policies that people want. So they are in tune with local people. But most importantly, there's also an economic aspect of good governance, because local governance, because this is based on local knowledge. It's much more accountable, and it's open to scrutiny, because people are close to the policy-making process rather than the centralized. So when it comes to implementing the policy, it's much more cost-effective. However, let's not look at the local governance as a panacea. I'm just going to play the devil advocates here a little bit. It's good, but sometimes we need to be careful, because if governance is too local, then we weaken the agglomeration economies, and there can be poor linkages between the local community and the broader community. Also, you can lose strategicness of the policies, the plans, and the programs. You too focus on the project, and you lose the broader picture of the whole strategicness of what actually you're doing. There's often a delegation of decision-making without resources. We're all familiar with this problem. So you allow community to choose what they want from themselves, but they don't have financial means to do it. Often this global governance is based on a top-down approach, where communities are mobilized from abroad. So there's no bottom-up or grassroots element to this local governance. And often, even if there are local organizations, they don't have statutory powers. They don't have means or power to implement their decisions. And lastly, as I mentioned before, local interest often can be, not often, but can be in contrast with the interests of the broader region. So I'm going to be briefly review what happened literally in the next 5 minutes in Sant Adrià in Barcelona, which is, sorry, it's not a neighborhood in Barcelona, but it's just in the outskirts of Barcelona. But this was a gypsy community which was rehoused there in the 1970s, and which has a terrible reputation across Barcelona. It's 100% social housing, lots of crime, insecurity, and so on. There are lack of local organizations. However, there is this strong, powerful evangelic church of Philadelphia, which is one of the religions that the local community is attached to. And also there's a local sense of attachment in place. So the government, the Catalan government, with both municipalities of Barcelona and Sant Adrià, decided to do something about this because this was costing the government quite a lot in terms of policing, social security, public health. So there was an economic argument to do something about the regeneration. So in 2000, they set up an area-based consortium to regenerate the area, which produced fantastic results. There was a vertical and horizontal integration of public authority, cross-departmental, several departments of the Catalan government working together. Participation increased, and the place has improved from an environmental and social results. However, once again, it was not all positive, because what I've noticed there when I was doing research is that these communities were mobilized from above. The local social capital, all this organization didn't arise from bottom up. They were actually created, not created, but artificially encouraged by the local authority. Also, once again, these organizations, once were set up, they were just consulted rather than they were not allowed to produce development plans. They were just consulted. And to me, this is one of the downsides of the whole project, because to me lacked really authenticity. And ultimately, because it wasn't authentic, but it was artificial and created from the top, we don't know what's going to happen to this project once the money, the funding ran out, because these were artificially created, and they may disgregate again once this project finished. So consensus building, I agree, it's fantastic, but sometimes it may not lead to the most efficient solution, because you try to combine all different interests together, so you reach a mediation which leave everyone unhappy. But it is something that has to be done, because the stakeholders are not fully happy, they're half happy, but the solution, the outcome is not is not perhaps the most efficient. And I can quote an example there of they discussed where to locate a school and a church, and there was a lot of negotiations, and then they ended up placing the school in the wrong place because they wanted to keep the local priest happy. So it was consensus building is fantastic, but may not lead to optimal solutions. And also, once again, the project-based approach is fantastic, but sometimes you lose the strategicness. You're too focused on building your local school, your local hospital, but you miss the broader picture. So what you're doing is not strategic. So I have a very simple message as a conclusion, rather than a very articulated set of conclusions. So to me, local governance and decentralizations are good, but careful not to be too local, because you lose a strategicness. And also, careful about not imposing governance from above. And thank you very much.